Now in this video, just like the previous two videos, we're now going to look at the unit circle looking at a 30-degree angle. So if we do that, we will look here at the unit circle. And we're going to have kind of the similar as the 60-degree angle, because what you're going to notice here now is if we look at a 30-degree angle, then a 30-degree angle is going to be here. So here's our 30-degree angle. And if we drop this line down for the right triangle, and that tells us again this angle has to be 60 degrees because again all three of these angles have to add up to 180. So we need to figure out what's going to be the x and y coordinate for this 30-degree angle. In other words, we could think of this also in radians as pi over 6. So whether it's pi over 6 here in radians or 30 degrees, we want to know what's going to be the x and y coordinate. Now, if you think back to when we looked at the previous video for a 60-degree angle, if you recall that 60-degree angle, you redraw another circle here, for the 60-degree angle, it was located up here, and we found this point for the 60-degree angle to be equal to x coordinate 1/2, the y coordinate was square root of 3 over 2. Now if you think about this, if you look at this triangle here and notice that this was 60 degrees, this angle up here is 30, then notice how that is changing when we over here on the left, how we may have a 30 and 60 now, they're changing places. So if you kind of think about that in relationship to the circle, it's going to kind of make sense that we're going to change the x and the y coordinate. So I'm not necessarily going to go through all the details like we did before, but essentially what we're going to end up with here is now, because the unit circle has a radius of 1 that's opposite of the right angle, then that tells us that the side opposite of the 30 must be half of that. So that means this must be 1/2. And then of course the x now opposite of this 60-degree angle must be a square root of 3 over 2. So therefore we have our x coordinate is square root of 3 over 2 and the y coordinate is simply 1/2. So now we want to go all the way around the circle and mark off, in this case we have pi over 6, and then if we were to look over here we would have 5 pi over 6, so that we would have our triangle here, and then we would end up with 7 pi over 6, and then if we draw the triangle over here in the fourth quadrant, it would be located here. So if you notice we have our right triangles, and of course then this location, if this is 5 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, then over here we would have, this would be 11 pi over 6. And we want to identify the x and y coordinates for each one of these particular angles. Well, you've probably guessed already, you're going to have basically the same an xy coordinate that we do for pi over 6 or the 30-degree angle, except for we're going to have to change to whether the sign is positive or negative based on the particular quadrant. So once again, in the second quadrant, we know the x value must be negative, so that's going to be a negative square root of 3 over 2, where the y coordinate is a positive 1/2. So then for 7 pi over 6, once again, in the third quadrant, we know that your x and y are both going to be negative, so we have a negative square root of 3 over 2 and a negative 1/2. And 11 pi over 6, your x coordinate is positive square root of 3 over 2 and a negative 1/2 for the y coordinate. And once again, you can verify this using the Pythagorean theorem as far as looking at x squared plus y squared equals r squared. And that's because here you notice the radius of each one of these, because it's the unit circle, the hypotenuse of each triangle is equal to 1. All right, I want to review what we've discovered in these past videos here by looking at the first quadrant here of our unit circle. And hopefully this will kind of review and connect all of this together for us. So once again, we have a unit circle. So we know that this point here, which we could label, and I'm going to use radians here at first. And you can certainly go back and fill in the degrees. So if we start here at 0 radians and we go around, then we would have, let's see if we mark this off, we could go to pi over 6. And then we can have here right in the middle, let's see, pi over 4. And then up here towards the top, we would have pi over 3. And up here at the top of the circle, we will have pi over 2. And what we want to be able to identify here is what is the coordinates for each one of these particular angles. So what's the x and y coordinate for the circle? Well, obviously we talked about the first one already. We know that that's got to be 1, 0. Okay, so there's the x and y coordinates. And for pi over 6, we discovered that it was going to be square root of 3 over 2 and 1/2. And pi over 4, because that's right in the middle, we said the x and y has to be the same value, which is the square root of 2 over 2. And then for pi over 3, it's going to be the switch, the reverse of the pi over 6, because we're switching kind of the 30 and 60 degree angle. So therefore, for pi over 3, we have 1/2 for the x and square root of 3 over 2 for the y coordinate. And then at the top of the circle at pi over 2, which would be 90 degrees, your x is 0 and the y coordinate is 1. Now at this point, we have each one of these, and I can go ahead and fill in the degrees as well. So we can think of this location as 0 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and at the top here we would have a 90 degrees. So if you notice here, these are all the values that you should memorize. You should know this pretty much by heart. And of course the 0 degrees and 90 degrees is very easy because of knowing the unit circle. And pi over 4 is the first one you should probably then start to memorize from there, because at that point you know that the x and y are the same. And if you memorize pi over 6, then you simply know that pi over 3 is just the reverse order of your x and y. And now, once you memorize the first quadrant, you should be able to determine the second, the third, and the fourth quadrant, because all of these values are going to be basically the same, just like we looked in the previous videos. The only thing that's going to change is the sign of your numbers. So therefore, when we're in the second quadrant, we would know that your sign of your x would have to be negative and your y would be positive. And if we are in the third quadrant, we would know that both signs would have to be negative. And when you're in the fourth quadrant, you would have a positive x and a negative y. And of course, in the first quadrant, both your x and y are both positive. So at this point, you should have a copy of this unit circle somewhere in your textbook, or you can find this online. And once again, these are the common angles that you need to be familiar with as we go around the unit circle. And these are going to be very important to know and understand once we get into studying the different trig functions. So make sure that you understand the radians and the angles and degrees, and more importantly, realize what these coordinates represent here as we go around the unit circle. So these again are the kind of common angles that we'll be dealing with. And that's not to say that we're not going to look at other angles as well. So once again, you pretty much want to memorize this circle. If not memorize it completely, at least be extremely familiar with it. And that way it'll make the rest of the course that much easier for you.